I'm Ben Johnson, your host for The Experience of God. Today we're talking to a man who was born Jewish, discovered Hinduism and Buddhism, and then the pathway to Kabbalah. You know what Kabbalah is? Join us and find out. Stephen, it's really great to meet you.
Great to meet you, Ben.
And I've been looking forward to this conversation now for several weeks since we had lunch together and I got just a glimpse into your life. I want to ask you, if you were describing what your life is about in a sentence or two, what would you say?
In a sentence or two, what's most important to me is to be an active participant in life. I think we're here to be participants. We're here to spiritually grow and express in positive ways what's wonderful about life.
Yep. Give me one simple illustration out of your life where you would say, well, this is what I'm talking about.
Well, for me, what's most significant in my life and the way that I feel I've been guided is to be a spiritual, I don't like the word teacher even, I've come up with the word facilitator. I'm also, by training, an attorney, and I sort of have morphed into and transitioned into being a mediator professionally. And facilitation is a big word in mediation, that mediators are there to facilitate a process where people come to their own conclusions that are in dispute, have a conflict. And I see that as a good term in the spiritual realm, to not just be, quote, a spiritual teacher where you're imparting knowledge to someone else, a body of knowledge, but you're assisting others to embark on their own self-discovery within.
And when you can help that to happen to one person or several persons, that is really living for you.
That's the most important thing in my life, is I just feel like that's what I'm guided to do, to help others. And through helping others, you always end up helping yourself.
Absolutely. And that gives me a good picture of what is meaningful to you. But I wonder, you sound to me like in our conversations previously, took you a little while to get there.
Yes.
How did you start out in life?
I was born. I very much
through no choice of your own.
Well, that's always a good question, because I think part of life's struggle is many of us, including me, I like what I call an existential approach. When I was in high school and studying some literature, when we came across existentialism, I was immediately enthralled with the whole idea and concept of existentialism, because it was going to what is the meaning of life.
Yeah.
And for whatever reason, from a very early age, those sort of questions burned in me. I wanted to know why I was here, what this was all about.
Yeah, now that's a religious thing. I think it's a religious question. Why am I here?
Right.
Ultimately is profoundly religious. What was your environment when you were a kid? What kind of faith were you reared in?
I was reared in a Jewish family. I was born Jewish, and my family wasn't very observant, but we were still very traditional. Judaism is a strange amalgam of traditional religious kind of approaches, but it's also an ethnicity, very much a cultural and ethnicity. And you know, with the founding of the State of Israel, you can say maybe it's a nationality also. So it's sort of a amalgam of all those things. And I was born into that amalgam. I was born a few years after the State of Israel was founded. And I was born into a somewhat traditional Jewish family, but not an observant family.
What did it mean anything to you? I mean, as far as the spiritual aspect or the existential aspect of Judaism,
Not, I mean, I was taught, I did go to Hebrew school, went to a traditional Hebrew school, a fairly orthodox Hebrew school, just by chance, more or less, and was inculcated with the traditional concepts of a big daddy God up in the sky who passed on judgment, and you were a sinner or a saint, or and would make penance, and all those kind of things. And during my high school years, I had a very big conflict because I questioned all those things. They didn't seem to make sense to me.
Tell me what that's like existentially when you're reared in one environment and your parents, whether they practice or not, have embraced a certain kind of faith, and then you come up with all these doubts and questions. What is that like for you?
It was a very emotionally intense time. It was during my teenage years where all of that was coming to the fore. That's when I was introduced to the philosophical existentialism. And when you start questioning what your environment, what your culture, what your upbringing has taught you, it's teenage years are a lot of emotional things going on anyway,
yeah.
And having that on top of it, it was emotionally intense.
That testosterone flowing through your veins.
Right. You got all those kind of normal teenage kind of things going on.
Yeah.
But I was always seen as, among my friends, as the more philosophical. I was the philosophical one, and
yeah.
I liked being alone. In addition to having a social life, I also liked my time alone.
Yeah. Now, where did your journey take you? In some ways, what you're describing is typical of all of us in adolescence. Sure. We have to reject where we were in order to embrace who we are, right. Even if it's the same thing. We have to reject it so we can re-embrace it.
Right, on our terms.
Yeah, right. It becomes ours, right. Instead of imposed on us.
Right.
So, how did that work for you?
It was a difficult process, but it was just a lot of process, like you said, of rejecting. But then when you reject, it creates a void, it creates a certain vacuum, and what is that filled with? So you don't want to just be a critic and just reject, and question all these values. Then you have to turn it back to yourself and say, well, what do I replace that with? Yeah. Where can I find guidance?
That's what I'm asking.
Because you generally look for guidance, and you try to find sources of guidance.
And what was your source of guidance? You must be 22, 3 years old by now? 18?
Well, I've gone through my teenage years and went into college, and probably my first broader exposure to a broader range of religious thought, philosophical thought, besides the existentialism and things like that, was actually a required course on comparative religion in my first year of college.
What was your great discovery when you took that course?
What excited me most was the Eastern religions, particularly okay. Hinduism and Taoism. Opened up entirely new vistas that seemed more in accord with vague feelings that I had inside that I didn't know how to express, and they were expressing those.
Talk about those feelings in Taoism and Hinduism that seemed to resonate with something inside you.
They were much more individual oriented and seeking your inner truth from within. Mm-hmm. There wasn't as much a focus on an external God kind of thing. It was much more an internal spiritual development from within. The whole idea of meditating I became exposed to early in college, and those concepts and the ideas behind yoga and Vedanta, particularly, I began focusing more on the Eastern. I liked Taoism a lot, but somehow the Indian spirituality was what seemed to really attract me.
And there's not a lot of dogma, not rules and regulations that are imposed from the outside in that faith, which was very much what you were reared in.
It's very much self-discovery oriented.
Right.
They give guidelines, they give suggestions more than commandments. So
tell me the first little breakthrough you had after reading it and getting it in your head. Describe to me the first time you said, aha, yeah.
Actually, I guess my biggest early aha moment was when I was still in high school, probably in my senior year, and the author Hermann Hesse was popular, and the book Siddhartha was popular. So I did pick up that book, and that book probably was the first budding of an inner lotus, reading that book. It was an introduction to the Eastern spirituality even before I went to college.
Would you say, I don't want to maybe be too Buddha in saying awakening, but was this the first batting of your eye, the first little glimpse when you read that book?
There were things earlier. You know, kids know a lot intuitively, and if their environment supports it, then it can help them blossom earlier. But if the environment is silent about it, you're sort of on your own. When I was very young, I realized in retrospect that I used to spontaneously do a meditation exercise when I was 8, 9 years old. And I did it mainly just to refresh my mind.
And what was that exercise?
I can very distinctly remember I used to do my homework at the kitchen table, and sometimes my mind would just get all tied up in knots, and I was getting frustrated, and I would just stop, and I would just stare at the kitchen wall, and I was able to just make my mind blank. And emptying my mind like that, just staring at the kitchen wall, just for a few minutes, with my eyes open, but not focusing necessarily on anything, sort of becoming unfocused. Within a few minutes, my mind would totally refresh, and I could go back, and what was perplexing me a few minutes earlier, I was able to address and solve and move on. Yeah. That was my earliest experience.
Yes. Now, it sounds like that in us, the path is already there, and it shows itself to us, and we don't recognize it.
Certainly.
But then later, you came back to that sense of awakening, that awareness. And how did that evolve? How did you let that expand within you?
Well, it's a lot of trial and error, and groping, what I would call sort of groping in the darkness,
yep.
Trying to find the light.
Tell me some things that characterized your groping. Where did you grope? What did you touch? What did you try out?
I became focused on the Eastern approach. I took formal meditation course. I took formal yoga classes, and they helped begin to give shape to those yearnings and those gropings.
There are a lot of people who don't know what that means. I know it's like first grade language to you, but what are meditation practices? What are Buddha practices that you got into that helped you?
Well, I was very fortunate in my second year in college. I had a roommate who was already an experienced meditator. So they helped guide me along. And my first formal meditation training was through the very popular program at the time of transcendental meditation. Maharishi Mahesh Yogi from India was one of the spiritual teachers that came over from India in the late 60s and 70s. And this was a very big movement at the time, and it was very accessible. My roommate was one of those practitioners, so he influenced me. And I got that formal training.
So that was an approach, but what is that particular approach? Tell me, if I ask you, Steve, guide me toward transcendental meditation, what would you tell me to do?
Well, if you really want to specifically transcendental meditation, I'd tell you to look up your local transcendental meditation place.
You're going to be my guru. You're going to be my guru.
But what I came to realize, again, after several more years of putting all these, what seemed to be diverse elements together and seeing how they may have fit in a bigger picture, I realized that what was being taught there was a fairly generic, standard, traditional Indian spiritual approach. They put a trademark on it and called it transcendental meditation, but it was Indian Vedic Vedanta-oriented meditation. It is the focus is that there are internal sounds. There is a very deep level within us that emanates out of silence, and there's the paradoxical sound of silence.
Mm-hmm.
I've always been a great, I won't know if I should say worshiper. I've always been enthralled with silence.
Yeah.
There's something very thrilling to me about silence. But out of this silence emanates sound. And these mantras in the traditional Eastern approach are emanations, articulations of those from that sound. And they are meant to lead you back to the source. And the source is the source of all.
So if you're going to help me with that, you would say to me, get seated comfortably, back erect, watch your breathing, relax your body, take your journey inward. And what do I do when my mind goes brrrr?
Well, the biggest question about what do I do with the mind, I recently studied with a teacher in my tradition, and he said, the answer was, don't do anything with your mind. People get very concerned about the mind, and they come to a meditation class, and most of them will say they want to stop their chattering mind.
Yes.
And the Buddhists talk about the monkey mind and the chattering mind. How do you stop the chattering mind? There's actually two aspects, at least there's more than two aspects, but two significant aspects to our mind that is important to understand that I learned through these studies. There's what I would call the lower mind, which is the chattering monkey mind, and there's a different type of mind that's still your mind, which the Buddhists and the Vedantists talk to as referred to, and the Zen Buddhists refer to as the quiet mind. So there's the chattering mind.
So is it possible?
And there's the quiet mind.
Is it possible to let the chattering mind go ahead and that I just remain in the quiet mind?
That's the point. You
And
don't worry about the chattering mind. The chattering mind may keep chattering and chattering. Another part of your mind is your ego sense, your identity. And if you identify with the chattering mind, you'll be caught up with the chattering mind. If you can, this sense of our identity, this sense of ourself can move.
Yep.
And if we can move from the chattering mind to the quiet mind, we don't care about the chattering mind. You don't do anything about the chattering mind. Let it go off and chatter.
Okay, I want you to be very personal.
Okay?
Where did this lead you? This transcendental approach, where did it lead you in your life?
It led me to a much deeper connection with what I call my spirit within, with the creative juices that flow from this very deep fountain within all of us, and recognizing the ancient saying that all that is within is also without, and vice versa. We are a microcosm of the macrocosm,
Mm-hmm.
and there is this great source of benevolence, creativity, nurturance, protection, guidance that we can connect with within ourselves, and we realize it's really beyond ourselves.
And that is what some people would call the divine, the
Right.
transcendent, the holy, the divine mystery within us, all kind of names, right. Because no name really captures it. You had in your own tradition, in kabalah, which way you say that,
right.
You had this kind of teaching there. Did you ever stumble across that?
It took me many years. I never felt like I was just adamantly rejecting Judaism after a while. I accepted that I was born Jewish. I wasn't trying to not be Jewish. It just didn't attract me, and I just accepted that that was my birth and didn't reject it or embrace